You're creating assets, you're creating a brand, which drives revenues, which drives the unicorn, not the other way around. The values are only real values if people believe it. And how do they believe it? They need to experience it. If there's a general positive vibe in the organization, it means a lot. People who are at barbecues, people who are in a social event and get asked what company they work for, the way they describe this company, if they have the ability to entice people to join that company by what they describe it, rather than saying, oh God, the CEO is hopeless, or the leadership team, or they just give a long sigh and roll their eyes.
Hello and welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast, where we interview business leaders and emerging market experts on business innovations, market opportunities, and macro-level trends in emerging and frontier market countries. Join us for the next hour to dive deep into the world of emerging markets as we speak with top performers who are successfully investing, working, and living in these markets themselves. Hello and welcome to this month's episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lal, and I'm very honored to be joined today by Georg Chmiel, an INSEAD grad who has been responsible for creating not one, not two, but 3 unicorns in his career. And they've all been in emerging markets, all in Southeast Asia. Georg was previously the executive chairman of iCarAsia, the #1 online automotive marketplace in Southeast Asia. He was also the managing director, CEO of iProperty, which he led to its sale to the REA Group in the largest ever online takeover in Southeast Asia at that time. And he is currently the co-founder and chair of Juwai-IQI Holdings, the largest proptech group in Southeast Asia right now, with over 30,000 sales agents. So clearly you've done a lot of interesting stuff in your career, had a lot of great success to say the least. But where I'd like to start out, which is probably most germane to this podcast, is what brought you to Asia initially? What made you decide to settle in this part of the world? And what was the opportunity that you saw that brought you out here?
Yeah. Good morning or evening, Nick. Thank you so much for having me on the show. So what brought me to Asia originally? I worked in Australia before coming to Asia, and I was serving as a non-executive director on the board of iProperty, and iProperty was listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, and we were looking for a new CEO in late 2013. And I was asked to consider the position, given my background, mix of real estate knowledge as well as online knowledge. So ultimately, given my existing business at that time was being taken over, it was very easy for me to make the decisions to move to Malaysia. I expected it to be for 2 years. I'm here now for 9 years, and I haven't regretted it for one day.
That's great. Malaysia's an amazing place, and KL is probably my favorite city in the world. I've really enjoyed living there the time that I did spend there. And so I always like to meet other people who know what KL is all about and enjoy it as much as I do. I guess my next question then would be, why Malaysia? What made you decide to base yourself there, live there long term, and start your business out of the country?
Originally, I only came to KL because that was where the headquarters of our property was located, the company I was asked to run. But within a short period of time, I really fell in love with the city and the country. And the more roles I had in Malaysia, the tighter the connection to the city and the country became. I'm now 9 years in Malaysia. Malaysia is one of my favorites in the Southeast Asian ASEAN region. I mean, everybody knows ASEAN is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, 700 million people, young population. It's very affordable. Malaysia is very affordable and has a strong culture for entrepreneurs and growth. Is also blessed with a very good infrastructure, transportation, as well as internet. And people like to smile, which is also a very, very important ingredient for success, especially in startups, where sometimes it's a bit tougher. I mean, it all obviously culminated also when I met my wife, who is a local from Malaysia, and married her. So now I'm here really for life.
Got it. Not a bad place to be stuck for life, definitely. So, I mean, I think all of that's really true. Large parts of the city are just highly, highly developed and wonderful infrastructure, but then the cost of living similar to much of the rest of Southeast Asia. Yeah. And people are very friendly, smile, speak English. So good place.
That's correct.
So there was a recent change in government in Malaysia. Anwar finally is the prime minister after waiting for a very, very long time. So I was wondering if that has, I mean, it's very recent, but I was wondering if there's been any effect you've seen on business confidence. What's the sentiment in Malaysia right now?
I mean, when the results were announced, the capital markets appreciated, the ringgit appreciated against major currencies, and also the government announced they will review the budget for next year. So a lot of good steps were taken to create confidence, but these are all forward-looking, obviously, expectations. The proof will be in the pudding on if the government is able to deliver. It's a unity government of all different factions and fractions. So therefore, it might be a very difficult government to steer, but if they get it right, it will be amazing for the Malaysian economy and the confidence of the Malaysian population in the government. I'm one of the optimists. Most of my friends are rather optimistic or moderately or modestly optimistic. I haven't found too many negative people about this change.
That's great to hear. So switching gears a little bit, I'd love to hear a bit more about your personal journey, particularly Juwai, which you've grown to be such a large, impressive company. So I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about what you've done before that and how that led to you starting this company.
Yeah, biggest part of my personal career was in the area of proptech and in high growth companies. So with my consulting background in McKinsey, I was blessed to be part of the high growth initiative in the late 90s, where I learned certain principles on what it makes for a company to be sustainably growing fast than 40%. My first company in the proptech space was REA, where it was very much about in the Australian market, helping the secondary or established property market in generating leads far more efficiently than newspapers can do it. So it was moving print to online. A very, very simple transformation, but a very, very effective transformation comes with all the benefits of being able to access all the listings, all the properties available so much faster, and even being able to display all the properties because no newspaper was able to display all the properties which were on sale in an easy, also searchable way before that. And when I moved up to Southeast Asia to run iProperty, it was kind of the next iteration. The business was initially built by the previous CEO as very much a copy-paste of REA into the Malaysian markets. Now, Malaysian markets and ASEAN markets like Thailand, Indonesia, it was even in Hong Kong, and Philippines, Singapore, they are different. And I mean, initially, the business had reached a certain size, but hasn't left the losses by doing the same thing as REA did. The question was then to transform it, and the answer was in the primary market, in the developer market, because in our markets, the developers spend 3 times more money than the agents spend on online advertising. And by finding the right products, using data intelligently, this whole business was transformed. The growth rate went up 5 times, and the business reached break-even profitability. Then it was taken over. And to a certain extent, Juwai-IQI is now the next iteration further up, where it's no longer about advertising, but about the transaction. Because initially, Juwai, as a classifieds portal, was generating leads, but it was generating leads as the leader of overseas properties for Chinese buyers. So there was a cross-border element in it, which made it particularly difficult. And if agents received leads from China, they were often simplified Chinese, but many agents overseas don't speak that language. So there were a lot of challenges. So ultimately, we came to the conclusion that rather than continuing growing a Juwai business, which was around $5 million, not doing too much growth, maybe 10%, 20%, let's bring it together with a transaction engine, because we believed that the leads we were generating were actually actionable as long as you had the right recipient who would take up that lead immediately, which was another big factor, that leads get very cold if you don't do too much about it within a few hours. The interest might be gone because people these days expect answers immediately. And we brought it together with a transaction business, which was a leading project marketing, like a developer sales business in Southeast Asia, which was one of the core interested markets for Chinese buyers. It was a business which was domestically leading and very active. And within a very short period of time, 3 years, the business really exploded in growth. We are now, last year, finished the year at about $100 million revenue. So a significant change to the 5 million, growing at 20% to 10%. And we're growing at more than 40%. So during COVID, we grew more than 100% because we were the only ones who were able to trade. And for next year, the growth is undeterred, north of 40%. We are in 22 countries now. It's not just the financials which have really exploded. It's all the other metrics. It is the right business for proptech across the ASEAN and Asian markets. And we're very, very optimistic about the future. It's doing sales for the developers, sales for the agents, as well as rentals.
That's really interesting and really impressive, of course. I think a lot of times when you look at startup successes, there's that sort of a pivot where you learn more about the industry and then decide that that's what you should do. Was there ever sort of an aha moment where you realized this is where we need to take Juwai if we want to grow it? Or what was the process like to where you are?
Ultimately, when we saw that some agents were able to, in Juwai, some agents were able to action these leads immediately, which we generated. Others were complaining that they were not working. We thought, how can this be possible? Because, they are generated the same way. And then we realized that the setup of Juwai was wrong, that a classified setup is only an intermediary step to the final holy grail, which is the transaction business. And the second bit was also for us to know that if we merged our classified side with a transaction business, with a business with already a large base of highly aligned selling and renting agents, what we would do is we would immediately convert our lead and we would immediately drive results. And that was, to us, as you say, the right pivot moment, because ultimately it should be about results. It should be solving a real problem. The problem is not, can you generate most leads? Many classifieds businesses still think it's not just in proptech and others. It's not. People don't care about the number of leads. People care about the result. How you get to the result, whether it takes one lead, 100 or 10,000 leads, it doesn't matter.
Right. I guess it's one thing to show high numbers of leads and it looks good, but what really matters and where the value is if the lead converts and what the quality of the lead is. So yeah, definitely makes sense to do whatever you can to create more conversions.
Correct. So quality gets assessed via the result. And last year we did 30,000 transactions, 15,000 rentals, 15,000 sales. That's really, really powerful. And how many leads did we take to get there? Well, definitely more than 30,000. But the leads don't just come also from classifieds. To a large part come from various channels, social media channels, as well as database marketing.
Wonderful. So there's clearly, real estate property development is huge in Asia, especially in places that have relationships with China. I was wondering, do you think that this sort of success could be replicated in other markets like Africa or Latin America?
Most definitely. We are in the ASEAN markets. We are now also in the Middle East, in South Asia, particularly India and Pakistan. We have had initial talks also with a few African countries. We are in Europe, so it also works in the more Western countries or in the Western countries. We are in Australia, in Canada. Yes, that model is transferable into many countries because ultimately it's a bit like an Uber or a Grab model. It works in every market. It needs maybe a few tweaks, but the platform which we have created, because ultimately our business works on a technology platform. We don't have offices on every corner. We only have, with 30,000 warriors or agents, we have about 30 offices. That's it. So the rest is all happening in a mobile device.
Sure. Given that you're already in places like India and the Middle East, has there needed to be any different approach in those markets versus Southeast Asia, or is it basically plug and play?
There's quite a lot of plug and play, particularly also in the primary and in the rentals business. Yes, commissions might be slightly different in the secondary market. Yes, there might be some differences in the workflow, how to settle any transactions. But in principle, real estate is a global phenomenon, and people all around the world, even if some countries always claim to be more passionate about real estate than others, I do believe people just love real estate because real estate is not houses, it's homes. This is a very, very primal love affair.
Right. Yeah. I guess passion for real estate is probably pretty universal.
Yeah.
I also noticed that your shirt that you're wearing says Space Talk on it. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and other things that you may be working on in terms of technologies or companies that you're most excited about these days.
It's technology. Of the other projects, I'm involved in 3 proptech companies, more in advisory role in the others or non-exec roles. My t-shirt, that is a wearables business, which is a watch for kids from the age of 4 to about 10 to ensure kids don't get lost on the way to school, to stay in touch, but don't play games at the same time. It's checking after the well-being and the safety of the kids. It allows for feedback about how kids feel and where they are. It's saved already more than 10 kids on a global scale, and it's operating in Australia and New Zealand, in Europe, including UK, as well as the Americas.
That's great. It's always really nice to see technology solve these sort of everyday
Exactly. Yes. Because ultimately with technology, it's always less about the technology itself, but how you apply the technology solving a problem. And I'm very passionate about platform businesses. And for me, obviously, my favorite markets are the ASEAN markets and Australia and New Zealand. Both markets are kind of add to ASEAN, and they're anyhow becoming more and more closer together. So for me, this is the perfect environment to operate in and be in, not just because it's warm and has amazing food, but because it has the right entrepreneurial spirit.
Sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. So why platform businesses, and what advice would you give to someone who may be interested in launching a business in Southeast Asia right now? What sort of problems should they be looking to solve and successful?
It must be a problem in the real world. So it's, you don't start with, I want to implement the blockchain business to Southeast Asia, but saying, okay, why do I want to implement blockchain to Southeast Asia? I've spoken to a very large petrochemical company in Indonesia, and they introduced it to avoid fraud from the way that the moment the oil is being pulled out of the ground to when it's sold. So that is a real problem which gets solved. The same thing is true also in the proptech space. You have all sorts of issues in your property journey, whether you're a tenant or a landlord, whether you're an owner or a seller of a property. Technology can help with many things, but most importantly, create transparency, create trust, and so on. But when building a platform, when building a business, I do believe building a platform is important, because what is key is you want people to regularly engage. You want some recurring revenue. You don't want to have like just, like an e-commerce type of style business where people buy once and never come back. You want to find ways of staying in touch without creating a business which is nice on paper but doesn't really work. I mean, we all know if we move into a property, let's say as a tenant even, within a few days or weeks, we find issues. How do we communicate? How do we report those issues? It's one of the most basic things. Also, for the entrepreneurs, do not be afraid of solving basic problems. If it sounds basic, that is not necessarily a bad thing. You don't have to solve, use AI to find the world's best property to where you feel most comfortable. I mean, if you like that, of course you should do it. But the problems, the daily problems, are often so simple, and then the volume makes all the difference. The scale. You want scalable business. Platforms help building scalable business. The large population in the ASEAN markets gives you the right ingredient for a scalable platform business.
As they say, the simplest solutions to the most boring problems usually make the most lucrative businesses.
Yes.
My follow-up would be, let's say you do find a problem worth solving, you create a solution for it and you're doing well, but at that stage there's clearly going to be other interests into the market. And so my question for you is, how have you navigated that, given that not only are you the top prop tech business in Southeast Asia, you've also led several other market leaders in the region, and so clearly you know how to become a market leader. So what advice would you give to someone who is trying to solve a problem and wants to be the market leader, the business that succeeds and is the go-to solution for that problem?
Apart from what we discussed earlier, being clear about what problem you're solving, and that includes also understanding the industry as is. Doesn't mean you have to digitize an existing industry. Yes, you revolutionize, disrupt the industry, but you need to actually understand how it's working. It's a bit like saying you can't do a logistics business if you don't understand what a car is. But then the other bit is surround yourself with good people. When that's easier said than done. But what I mean by good people is people who are equally passionate about solving this problem. You do not necessarily, I mean, it helps, but have to have all these different people from all these top business schools. It can be also people who operate in your own market. I mean, yes, you meet a lot of people via business school, so it's a great network and so on and so forth. But just aggregating lots of them is not necessarily a guarantee for success. The other thing is persistence. There's a difference between being stubborn and being persistent. Persistence includes the pivoting, the ability to pivot. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you can try forever and it will not work. But if your business has a positive contribution margin, if your business is growing, and if there's a path, a really credible path to get out of investments, out of the investment phase, you should not give up. You should rather use your creativity to work out, how can I accelerate? How can I move faster to that point? And often, many businesses give up, honestly, probably 6 months or 1 year before the success. The founders, I'm not the founders of iProperty, but the founders of iProperty told me they had 74 no's before they got a yes to their business model. In Juwai-IQI, for the first 2 years, we spent a lot of time trying to explain to people that it's better for a classified business to be actually closer to the transaction, because the common belief was, yes, it needs to be a pure classified business. Nowadays, world has changed. Many of the reports you read and so on, they're just followers. I mean, if you think of Zillow's unsuccessful and obviously unsuccessful because it was simply a flawed thought of the iBuying model, might mean that some people think transactions are not good for online businesses. But that's not the case. The flaw in the model of Zillow is that the margin is too low. And number two is you shouldn't take ownership of a property. That's the two key things, because that's a fundamentally different problem. And same for Open Door, and it's the same for Carvana, ultimately, at this moment, who are obviously also in dire straits. So in this case, persistence might not pay off. As long as you're solving the right problem, as long as you're passionate about you're doing it. Do not wake up is maybe the other thing, is if you join a business and somebody says, I want to build a unicorn, and that's the first thing they say, I would not join. Because this is not the aim. The aim is not to create a unicorn. The aim is to create an amazing business which is known, which is a brand. When I go somewhere and say I was iProperty or I was iCar, I'm Juwai-IQI, people get excited. I mean, it's nice to have that. And it's not because the business is, because the business got a lot of attention, but everybody had to deal with the business. So dealing with the business means you're creating assets, you're creating a brand which drives revenues, which drives the unicorn, not the other way around.
Sure, absolutely. Creating something that impacts people's lives and is the goal. Yes. Do you have any personal rule of thumbs as to decide whether this is the time to pivot, or is there a line for you between persistence and stubbornness?
I mean, probably the number one reason for pivoting is if I don't really understand why we're doing things a certain way. That would be the first time. As long as a vision is clearly defined, as long as everybody buys into the vision, as long as I can go around in the business and ask different people about what the business is about, they all pretty much say the same thing. As long as you have a supportive shareholder base and there's confidence, I would say there's no reason to make a dramatic pivot. But at any point in time, I like to be paranoid about the future and constantly question if I'm doing the right thing, so complacency is probably the biggest risk on the other side. So on the one side, giving up too early, but on the other side, being too complacent and believing your own wrong statements. I'm not using this word.
Yeah, I can see where you were going with that. So which is your biggest market in Asia right now?
The biggest market for the Juwai-IQI business is at this stage Malaysia. The biggest opportunity is in the longer term, Indonesia, just by the sheer power and size. Population is not the only fact. It's really also the growth in GDP per capita, the fact that you have these mega cities in this country, each of those cities, some of those cities being bigger than Malaysia.
Sure. I think that's where a lot of people are looking for their
Yes. But I would not discount, the others, like apart from Malaysia, Indonesia. Singapore obviously is important because that helps you with overseas money at this stage, because there's still a lot of confusion about what is ASEAN, is it really that big, and so on and so forth. So Singapore has an amazing role in these markets. The Philippines and Vietnam and Thailand, very, very attractive market. But I would also not discount the smaller ones, like Laos or Cambodia. I mean, we are in Cambodia, and we're growing also nicely in these markets, obviously on a smaller scale.
Sure. And in these different markets, it's catering to their local languages, or would it still be?
Most of it is English, but obviously our warriors, the 30,000 warriors, they speak English and at least one Asian language. And that was also a massive advantage because most of them speak at least Cantonese or Mandarin. So suddenly, if you bring it together with the largest website for overseas properties in China, suddenly you have 20,000 or so people who all speak one or two Chinese dialects. That definitely helps when you interact with consumers. Language is key. For Malaysia, English is fine. Obviously, Singapore English is fine. For Indonesia, you have to start also to do Bahasa the Indonesian language. And for the other markets, yes, we are bilingual.
Sure. And it seems like from what you're saying that hiring and talent is a big component of what you're attributing your business success to. I was wondering what you look for when you hire.
Yeah, it's really, I focus really on, are these people willing? A lot of skills can be learned. Obviously you don't want people who don't understand business and like some people simply don't have a feeling for it, but most people have a reasonable understanding of it. For me, it's important. Do people really are able to identify themselves with the business? So whether it's a car or property, do they feel passionate about it? Do they like the industry, or do they think, all car dealers or all real estate agents are dodgy? And as long as they see that these are hardworking people who also make a difference, and also that they see that by putting in a platform, you actually make the whole industry a better one because you create transparency and efficiency in this business. That's what I'm after most of the times. As I said earlier, it does help, obviously, to have a background of a business school, but just accumulating business school people does not solve the problem.
Sure. And this business knowledge and personal skills and all that, do you suss that out through interviews, or how would you recommend someone to really know whether this is someone that fits the sort of characteristics you're looking for? Given I'm a bit older now, I have a network of people I've worked with. So I have people I've worked with in 5 different roles. That's the maximum so far. And so I have my network, and I would say 20% to 50% of the hires are from the wider network, and 50% are from the network of the network, and maybe a few come in via, like direct applications. I like that, when people have the courage to say, look, I love your business. I want to have a shot. And I think offering people an opportunity who have the can-do attitude is really, really important, because these are committed people. These are people who are really, really keen. I like to hire also people who understand certain areas much better than myself, because that gives me comfort. And the worst is if you get yourself nervous about, do you really understand the business you're in? Are you really making all the right decisions? If you surround yourself with experts in different fields rather than generalists, it becomes really, really good. So then you can become more the moderator of the discussion and come up with an optimal outcome of all of this. And the other thing, there's 2 types of people. Both have a right in the business sense. So I know people who have millions of emails unanswered or answered in their inbox. I'm the opposite. I have none. I always go for a clean email account. I always use tasks and so on. Both works. What I've learned is the one side shouldn't try to give advice to the other side, because that's a bad thing. So if I let my inbox flow over, I'm lost, and vice versa. If I try to teach people how to clean up their inbox, that's also a bad advice. People are different. That's the power. And that's how we also come up with new ideas. And that's how we are successful in disrupting all sorts of industry, whether it's proptech, fintech, car tech, you name it. That's really interesting. I think the point of hustle, subject matter experts being validated by those are all really interesting. But the last point I maybe want to expand a little bit further on, I think it's really interesting that you like to bring in people with different work styles or ways of thinking in, and clearly that's great for innovation. My question would be, when there is someone who's so different from yourself, how long of a leash do you give them to operate the way that they do? It seems like there's certainly room for intellectual diversity, but then there's also the question of how do you assess someone who may not perform in the way that you're used to assessing a person?
Yeah, I was talking about how they organize themselves. And as long as they stay on top of the different tasks they have, and most importantly, as long as everybody, and this is also a big ask for me, I need to be able to align people behind a common goal. And this is the ultimate thing. In any company, people need to be able to describe what we are actually trying to do and why, and how we are different to others who are probably comparable companies are, if they exist, and which ones are the ones which are different. So as long as I'm setting the company on a clear task, I don't have to tell people necessarily exactly how to solve certain tasks, but explain to them why we have to solve the task in order to succeed. And by letting them find out how to solve that, my role becomes far more the moderator, the ensurer of communication, the person who keeps things together, the person who checks, do we have enough capacity for the growth? And is the vision right? Do we need to pivot and so on and so forth? So my work style, I once read, is probably very much aligned autonomy in high growth companies. So the direction needs to be clear. The problem which we're going to solve, the next type of problem, need to be understood and agreed by everyone. And then we need to go away and work through it. But I'm not a big believer in implementing necessarily all the latest things you read in business books into one company, because best practice has never necessarily been the best strategy. Yes, certain things might be applicable, but it needs to be judged against the clear direction of the company. Many companies implement all these things just to overcome the fact that they haven't actually a clear direction and a clear articulated vision, meaning they have a weak leadership team or a weak CEO at the helm. So they implement all the other things to emulate. We want to be like Google. We want to be like all these other companies. But that's not leading to success. What leads to success is if everybody believes in the company, everybody believes in the strategy, everybody believes in the values that are described. When I joined iProperty, the walls were full of value statement. We are innovative. We care about people. We give purpose. And when you ask people, there was a big disconnect. So the first thing we did is we really literally painted over all these value statements. We said the values are only real values if people believe it. And how do they believe it? They need to experience it. So we said, okay, if we want to be innovation, how do we make people experience it? So we started to really actively innovate, use drones, use chatbots, other things 8 years ago in the business, solving real business problems. And then over time, people became really proud of the business and they said, we are so innovative. And then we said, okay, innovation, tick. Now we focus on purpose. Now we focus on people. Now we focus on the other value statements which we have.
Amazing. One follow-up to that maybe you've already answered, but we'll see if there's anything else that comes from it. So it seems that even before Juwai or iProperty, a large portion of your career, you've been an executive at a lot of different businesses, and it seems like you've achieved excellence at pretty much all of them. So I was curious if you have any thoughts on what makes you such a successful executive and what traits does someone need to be a successful executive? You mentioned that just following the best practices and so on makes for a weak CEO. So what would you say a great CEO is?
A great CEO, first and foremost, needs to have confidence in themselves. That doesn't mean overconfidence, but if that person has confidence in themselves and confidence in the team, which is the other very, very important bit, that's a massive, massive step forward. Confidence by knowing which direction the business to take in, by accepting the role of a CEO, which means the buck stops with that person. That's ultimately the first part. The second part is to be able to listen to people, not trying to outsmart everyone, but really trying to listen to the leadership team and being able to separate noise from real feedback and actioning on it. Also, never to forget lessons which already have been learned in the past. So while I said best practice is not necessarily the best strategy, but repeating the mistakes every time again and again is definitely the wrong strategy. The CEO also cannot relax. It might sound as an amazing title, but it is actually a very, very, very tough role. And it takes a lot out of people. And never underestimate the power and the intelligence of the people you're around. And if people do not want to play ball, you have to be firm. You have to act immediately. You can't drag it out too much. I have never come to the conclusion that I asked somebody to leave too fast. I've only come to the conclusion that I probably waited too long. And not once, but many times.
No, management always has these different
ways. And then also, when you look at a company, I said earlier, being able to describe what the vision is. The second bit is also looking at the whole reporting, because the whole reporting should be a reflection of your vision. And most companies have historic reporting or backwards looking, P&L, cash flow statement, balance sheet, and so on. very, very few companies have at least an equal number of forward-looking reports to the backward-looking reports. Because if you look backwards, it's kind of driving a race car fast, and all you do is you try to steer via the rear mirror. So if you see in the rear mirror, oh my God, I jumped over a hump or there was a danger on the road, once you start to respond, you're so far ahead that it's impossible to do it. Also, really listen to how people describe the business. Don't get deterred that they're like sometimes certain employees are a bit grumpier and whatever, but if there's a general positive vibe in the organization, it means a lot. People who are at barbecues, people who are in a social event and get asked what company they work for, the way they describe this company, if they have the ability to entice people to join that company by what they describe it, rather than saying, oh God, the CEO is hopeless, or the leadership team, or they just give a long sigh and roll their eyes, that's ultimately all these things, all these attributes and factors which are really, really important in an organization. Not being shy of making harsh decisions. I mean, we've all seen quite some dramatic changes in some companies, and many of them certainly take a lot of courage. Therefore, the confidence element is important. And also go a bit with the flow. We do all the communications these days on WhatsApp, not on email. I mean, definitely not on calls or other things, because it's faster. It puts everybody on the same level. Like in a Zoom call, everybody has the same size of a box. The CEO doesn't get a bigger or a frame or anything like that. So the world's changing, and we have to change with it. And that's what the Romans said 2,000 years ago. So never forget lessons which already have been learned.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. One final question. What's your favorite Malaysian food?
My favorite Malaysian food? Laksa pulas, which is a fish stock-based laksa. Nasi ayam, which is chicken rice, but Ipoh style, because the water there is better with the limestone and sprouts. And pami also, which is a nice soup with a bit of anchovies and other things. Long story short, I have not found a food which I don't like in Malaysia, and I have to really look after my body weight.
Right. That's probably the biggest problem there.
This is a bit, while the fruits are all healthy, the food, unfortunately, is pretty rich.
Right. It's so good, yeah. But those are some of my favorites too. I really
right? Well, nasi lemak, and the juices are amazing. So, yeah, it's a beautiful country, and it's a bit overlooked. People know Singapore, people know Thailand, and people don't know too much about Malaysia.
Yeah,
time to change it. I hope you come back soon. Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Georg, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And I know you have a busy day, so I'll let you get to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. It was a pleasure. All the best.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn.